Welcome, and thank you for attending our event tonight, Automated Trucking, Innovation in Delivery. I am Chris Roberts, Vice President and co-founder of the DC Autonomous Vehicle Association, and we are pleased to host this event tonight in coordination with the DC Capital chapter of the Association of Unmanned Vehicle Systems International. We would like to especially thank Christine Kakamis and Patrice McAuliffe for working very hard to make this event happen tonight. And we'd also like to thank Akin Gump for providing the technology to make tonight happen, and especially Justin Tolles, Natasha Hill, and Angelo Guerrero. Obviously, this and other industry events have been hosted online due to the COVID-19 pandemic. There have been many aspects of our society and economy that have been illuminated by the pandemic and other recent events. One of these aspects has certainly been the complex logistics that brings fresh produce and other goods to towns across the country. The American consumer may not have had to dwell on the trucks that sustain their communities until they were staring at empty shelves. But the fact is, more than 70% of freight in the country is moved by the trucking industry, an industry that will likely see significant changes from automation in the coming years. At the DC Autonomous Vehicle Association, it's part of our mission to educate and empower the public and key stakeholders on the benefits of autonomous vehicles, and we are excited to have this event tonight on trucking. Finally, a few housekeeping items. If you'd like to submit a question, please do so in the chat function at the bottom of your screen. You can also use the chat function if you're experiencing any technical difficulties. During and after our event, we welcome you to continue the conversation on our Slack channel, DC-AVA Events. Finally, for any press in the room, we ask that you reach out to any individual panelists for any comments they might make tonight before any publication. And now I'd like to introduce Kevin Schlosser, President of the DC Autonomous Vehicle Association and moderator for tonight.
Thank you very much, Chris, and thank you all for coming here tonight. This collaboration with the Capital chapter of AUVSI has been a long time in the making, but it's well worth the wait because it's a near perfect alignment. Both the DCAVA and AUVSI share common goals of seeking to educate and empower government, industry, and the public on the benefits of autonomous vehicles. And AUVSI has a deep history in not just ground AVs, but nearly all facets of unmanned vehicles and robotics. And we are proud to partner with them for this discussion on autonomous vehicles tonight. I think I can speak for both organizations when I say that we are proud to be a catalyst for collaboration, education, and innovation. Speaking of innovation, before we get to our panel, we do have a special announcement from Keely Griffith, the Director of Industry Education for AUVSI. So I'll hand it off to Keely now.
So thanks for giving me the opportunity to join you all this evening. As Kevin said, I work for AUVSI, the Association for Unmanned Vehicle Systems International. It's quite a mouthful. We're a trade association representing all things unmanned and air, maritime, and of course, ground. AUVSI is devoted exclusively to advancing the unmanned systems and robotics community through advocacy, market growth, and my personal favorite, education. I say it often, but I believe that ignorance encourages fear, and education plays an important role in encouraging public awareness and acceptance of these systems. The Automated Vehicle Symposium is produced in partnership between AUVSI and the Transportation Research Board, and it's all about bringing together leaders in the field of AV to really intellectually connect with one another. While we love to be together in San Diego this year, the world had other plans, and we are now preparing for an entirely virtual event. So just in case your excitement may have just dipped a little bit when you heard the phrase virtual, because we've all had quite a bit of that, I want to let you know that this event isn't just a webinar, hashtag not just a webinar. The platform is really robust, and entirely inclusive of the components that you've come to know and love about the traditional symposium, and slightly more convenient. So the program features over 30 breakout sessions, some in multiple parts, more than 20 plenary talks and government and industry keynotes. Sessions are going to be available on demand after the event ends, so there's no pressure to make a session if you have a conflict. See, it's pretty convenient. The networking opportunities are going to be layered throughout the 4 days, and they include a video roundtable discussions, one-on-one meeting functionality, and authentic engagement in all the breakouts, plenaries, and poster sessions. Additionally, and likely the most interesting to this audience, there are breakouts and a plenary session dedicated entirely to AV trucking and featuring a few of the speakers that you'll hear tonight. You can find out more on our website at avsymposium.org, and we hope to see you there. So thanks for the opportunity, Kevin.
All right. Thank you, Keely. And I have to say, I went to AVS last year and loved every minute of it. I think the best part of it is that there's something for everyone. Whether you're an engineer, developer, transportation planner, a policy analyst, policymaker, you're going to learn, and you're going to learn a lot. So I'm definitely looking forward to it again this year. So I think we're about ready to get started with our panel. And I'll let the panelists introduce themselves. And we'll go in the order of Richard, Salika, Robert Brown, and Robert Dingley.
Okay, I guess I'm up. Thank you, Kevin. Thanks for the invite here. And I also want to give a really strong shout out to the Automated Vehicle Symposium as well. I've been involved in the organizing committee since it started back in 2014. It really is a different and a high quality activity. Working with Robert Brown on the planning committee this year, and we will have a truck automation breakout that I'm helping to plan. So connect with me on LinkedIn or whatever if you're interested in that. So to introduce myself, I've been involved in automated vehicles since the mid-1990s, believe it or not, and I've been privileged to watch the industry evolve. Since that time, I've been functioning as a strategy and partnership consultant across the entire industry. I'm a breadth guy rather than being a depth guy. And so I work extensively with the truck automation world, the OEM passenger car world, buses, you name it, and also helping the government agencies understand and navigate these waters. So I guess I'll leave it there.
Hi, everybody. This is Salika Josiah Talbot, and I want to give a big thank you to DC Autonomous Vehicles Association and Akin Gump for sponsoring this event tonight. I look forward to the discussion with my colleagues, and as way as introduction for me, I practice as an attorney defending cases involving heavy trucks and vehicles for many years. And about 10 years ago, I joined the department in New Jersey of motor vehicles as the deputy administrator and ran all operations with a large breadth and understanding of the motor carrier field. I recently left Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, which is the regulatory arm of DOT responsible for large trucks and buses, and am privileged to be a professor now at American University with a specific concentration in policy around vehicle automation. Thank you.
I believe I think I'm up next. Hi, everyone. Robert Brown with a company called Too Simple. I've been with the company almost going on 3 years, which feels like forever for a startup, but enjoy it very much. Enjoy all my fellow panelists today. I've had an opportunity to get to know Kevin over the years, and thank you very much for thinking of us and thinking of me, and very excited about this opportunity and looking forward to this discussion.
Good afternoon, good evening, everybody. My name's Robert Dingley. I've been in the auto industry for a long time now, but transitioned to autonomous vehicles about 5 years ago. I work for Plus AI, and I've been there since about the beginning of the year. Before that, I worked at a couple of other robo-taxi companies, and prior to that, I've worked for Tesla, GM, and Ford over the last 25 years or so. Prior to autonomous vehicles, I was working in powertrain and other electronic controls, but with a heavy focus on safety, and that's, I guess that's the area I'm representing tonight. Thank you.
All right, thank you all. So before we start a conversation about autonomous trucking, I think it's important that we understand the current state of the trucking industry today, automation aside. Salika, can you begin by giving us a broad overview of the industry today? What role does it play in our economy? What does a typical trucking job look like?
Sure, I'd be happy to, Kevin. You know, as they say in the business, if you look around your home, including your vehicle, about 72% of everything that you see traveled on a truck in some way. Trucking really is the backbone of our country and our economy. There are about 15.5 million trucks on the road every day, with 3.5 million professional truck drivers. They're moving approximately 800 billion tons in freight revenue across the U.S. So the numbers are astronomical. 78 million jobs in America are either trucking or trucking related. So it has a huge impact on our economy. To understand trucking also, we have to talk about the jobs and the motor carriers or trucking companies as they exist. Approximately 91% of all trucking companies in the U.S. are 6 trucks or less. So these are the small mom and pops, what we call the entrepreneurial small businesses. And they have, in some ways, a really hard road toe, so to speak, because as innovation takes place and technology advances, their concerns evolve around how to make those changes on the fly. A tractor trailer and truck could cost about $250,000. So it's a huge investment for a small business to make. If we look at some of the issues that are facing the trucking industry today, one of the things that I think most companies would say that's paramount is the trucking shortage. We probably need to make up almost 1 million trucking jobs over the next decade to counter what we know is an increased demand as well as a retirement impact on the industry. You all, like I do, probably love to have items delivered to your home, and we want them delivered overnight. And so we have put additional pressure on trucking capacity in the U.S. But there are many greater areas that are pressing this industry. If we look at electronic logging devices and parking and retention and hours of service and this regulatory framework that seems to keep shifting on our drivers, a roadway filled with distracted passenger car drivers, the traditional truck driver spends probably, especially an over-the-road truck driver, maybe 300 days a year on the road. It is impactful on your lifestyle and on your body. The pressures are so many, and the field has such a great demand that it almost begs the question for some relief. And it's not if automation can provide the relief, it's just how much of a relief automation can provide. If you want to ask about some of the things an average truck driver faces on a daily basis, new regulations requiring that pre and post-trip inspection, which has become quite significant in terms of that under the hood review by the truck driver before they start their day and after the end of the day. What's the load and unload like? Are they detained waiting to be unloaded? Will they be able to park if they have to pull off because they are out of hours of service? Now we have electronic logging devices, but you still have paperwork that's required from your company or whoever you're shipping for. Those are the things that impact a driver on a day-to-day basis who may be driving upwards of 500 miles each day. Just a small window into what the life of a truck driver is like and what the trucking industry is going through.
Wow, so that seems really complex. It's no wonder why people are looking to bring innovation into this space. So Richard, I was wondering if you can give us a brief history of automated vehicles. How did we get to where we are today?
Yeah, sure. It goes back a lot further than most people realize. All the way to the 1950s, there was prototyping going on, very, very basic, but it was happening. A lot of hand-holding, etc. I think one of the modern era started in the 90s when initial pretty high-function automated vehicles were created. I was part of a US DOT program that was involved there. There were similar programs in Europe and Japan. And there's some impressive demos. You can go and look at Demo 97 on YouTube, and that was the US program. And there were various things moving there, but the commercial players weren't deep into it at that time. And the second wave really came when things shifted to where the public money was originally dominant in making things happen, and now it's really a very small part. It's become private sector, private money. And I give Google credit to doing that after the DARPA challenges and the OOs. Google started their process. They were far ahead of what traditional vehicle OEMs would be doing, but they could get out there and take the risk, and it sort of caught fire in a good way. And on from there. So it's been venture capital money. It hasn't been traditional vehicle industry until maybe the last 5 years. And then, we've got sort of everybody in the game. I first experienced a fully automated truck in platooning mode in 1999 on a highway in Germany. That was a publicly funded program that had Daimler involved and Renault Trucks and Iveco. The engineering capability has been there, but of course that first capability is far from the end, and the process has been the rigor that has been coming in since 2010 or so to really create systems that fulfill requirements that are ready for commercialization, whether it's trucks or buses, robotaxis, or private cars. So that's where we've come from.
All right, very interesting. Robert Brown from Too Simple and Robert Dingley from Plus AI. Can you tell us a little bit about what each of your companies are doing and to work on automating these trucks?
Oh, great. We got the Robert squared. I like that. From a Too Simple perspective, we were founded in 2015. We've always been focused on trucks. We're headquartered in San Diego, California. All the fun stuff, 40 trucks, a mixed fleet of Peterbilt and Internationals, are retrofitted with our technology, and we run daily operations for folks like UPS and the US Mail and McLean Foods, primarily running from between Phoenix and El Paso right now, with ambitions to head further into Texas on a regular basis. We, along with most people in the industry, believe level 4 is the sweet spot for automation, especially for heavy trucks. It's repeatable routes, distribution center to distribution center, high volume. It's B2B. It's a lot cleaner than our robotaxi friends trying to convince consumers to get in their vehicles. And as Salika mentioned, the pain points of the industry, it's ripe for a positive disruption. I always like to be clear, we're not removing we're moving the driver out of maybe a segment of the trip, but we're not removing the driver out of the ecosystem of the freight industry. So, very excited to be a part of this, very excited about be a part of Too Simple, and looking forward to the rest of the conversation.
Thanks. Plus AI has a very similar focus. Plus AI were founded in Cupertino, California, in the heart of Silicon Valley in 2016. In 2018, they've opened a couple of offices in China, one in Beijing, one in Suzhou, which is just out of Shanghai. Bus's model is a hub-to-hub model. Again, there is obviously scope there for drivers to be driving the first and last mile of the route, but we are focusing on the long haul part of the route, which we believe is the route that's ripe for efficiency. Bus's business model is based on being an autonomous truck technology company. We don't intend to own a large fleet. We don't intend to be a commercial carrier and compete with the existing players. We intend to supply technology to partners. Our aim is to become the first to commercialize autonomous trucks. So I guess we're in a race with our friends at TuSimple in that regard. We are, and the way we're doing that is by forming strong partnerships and deploying great technology, and of course we're working with with those partners to develop a commercialization strategy that brings us to market. I think that's about it. We are a full stack SAE level 4 development company, and people might remember back in, I think it was December last year, we did a run, a cross-country run, which was the first cross-country run carrying a commercial load. We did 2,800 miles driving across the country. We deliberately chose a northern route because it posed a few more challenges with altitude, weather, and different scenarios. We carried a load of butter for Land O'Lakes, which was highly publicised at the time. Our fleet consists of, let's say, dozens of trucks. I don't know exactly how many we have. We have Internationals, Kenworths, and Peterbilts in our American fleet. We have a joint venture in China with FAW, where we're developing a product that has been announced will go to market sometime next year, and that's a level 2 driver assistance. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Robert. I do have some engineering questions, but before we get into those, Robert Dingley, would you be able to explain what level 4 is? That's been mentioned a few times so far.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the Society of Automotive Engineers defined, I guess, 5 levels. There's actually 6 levels if you include level 0, with the first level being either lateral or longitudinal control. So that is either steering control to keep you in lane or a smart cruise control system, normally known as adaptive cruise control. Level 2 combines both of those systems so that the car now controls your speed, but also controls the steering. So there are various passenger car products that give you that facility, Tesla Autopilot being probably the most obvious one. Level 3 is very similar to level 2. The driver is responsible for monitoring the environment. The vehicle is responsible for monitoring the environment, but the driver has to be capable of taking over. The problem with level 3 is that there's no definition of that time frame. Is the driver meant to be watching the road at all times? Can they be reading a book? Can they fall asleep? The driver has to be capable of taking over, but there's really no clear definition of what that means. And the difference between 1 second and 5 seconds on a road can be quite critical. Level 4 is where you now take the leap to where the vehicle is responsible for monitoring the environment and responsible for taking action and being able to put itself into a safe state. Level 4 is defined as being in a restricted operational design domain, which means it is capable of performing the necessary functions within a certain domain. So it may be that it's capable of hub-to-hub driving, but perhaps not capable of city driving, for example. It may be capable of driving on highways, but not on roads with intersections, etc. Level 5, by definition, is the capability of the vehicle to drive anywhere. So we like to think that humans are capable of level 5. I think realistically, most humans are not capable of level 5. I think there's always areas where humans actually aren't capable. For example, I don't have a heavy truck license. I will be capable of driving a heavy truck. So I have 5 truck drivers. And most people are working towards level 4. Obviously, that's either have the driver not watching the road at all time. The driver could be sleeping if they wanted to, resting, or perhaps you don't even have a human in
Got it. And sorry to keep you on the hot seat here, Robert, since you're the resident engineer. But would you be able to tell us how a level 4 autonomous vehicle sees the world, makes decisions, and is ultimately able to navigate itself on a roadway?
Okay. So what's outlined is the basic process and the basic of decision making that our system has to do. It has to sense the world, has to decide where it wants to go, and then it has to affect that plan and control itself throughout the world. So we start with a sensor set. We have a range of sensors, as do most autonomous vehicles. In our particular case, we have multiple cameras giving us 360-degree vision. We have radar, again, giving 60-degree radar vision, and LiDAR, which is a form which is very similar to radar in principle. It has some slightly different, works at different frequencies, so it has different pluses and minuses. So obviously cameras can see just as humans can. They're very good to get a two-dimensional image of the world. Radars don't have the resolution of cameras, but they do give us the benefit that they can measure distance and relative speed very accurately. And depending on the type of LiDAR, you can get those same benefits, but LiDAR has the benefit of being much higher resolution than radar. At this point in time, there is a convergence between radar and LiDAR technology in terms of feature set taking place with some of the new technologies. So taking all of that information, we then have to determine where the road is, where we are on the road. We have to determine what other objects are on the road and in which direction they appear to be heading. From there, we have to predict which path they're actually going to take, and that prediction part is actually one of the toughest challenges going forward because that involves human nature. And whilst humans are figuring out the intention of what other humans may do in terms of pedestrians in particular, it's very difficult for a computer to work out whether a human actually intends to jump across the road or turn the corner or whatever. Once we've predicted where all the other players on the road are, then we need to decide where we want to go. It's a compromise between, it's a balance between safety, efficiency, comfort, and a few other factors, perhaps wear and tear on the vehicle. Once we've worked out where we want to go, we plot a trajectory, and then we control the vehicle to that level. And then finally, there's actuation where you send commands to electronically controlled steering elements, braking elements, and powertrain on a truck. That's basically the whole system. Our trucks are designed to operate in a limited range of road environments, but over time this technology will improve and the range of road environments or the operational design domain will increase, and the penetration of this technology into more and more roads and road types will increase.
So I'd imagine something like this requires a lot of testing and refinement. Richard, can you tell us a little bit about how autonomous vehicles are tested, especially on the trucking side? Do things like truck weight come into play and highly complex transmissions?
I can speak to this at a high level. I'm not a deep expert on it. I think Robert Dingley knows a lot more about this than me. But in general, the testing has to happen at several layers. Certainly, as you're developing your initial system, you can do a lot of testing on a test track, for instance, in parallel with a simulation process in terms of how your vehicle works. But that's not enough, and you need to get out on the open road. So the test protocols now, whether it's robotaxis or level 4 trucks, involve taking a level 4 design system. That software is running. The truck is going down the road, and there's a safety driver in the driver's seat. Hands and feet ready to take over at any point. These are highly trained individuals. And at the same time, there's a safety operator or an operations specialist in the passenger seat who's sort of dealing with the engineering issues, anything else that needs to be dealt with, so that the driver can really focus on the driving task. You have to do that to get out there and just understand all the variability in the larger world. Plus AI, in fact, has been in the press that they're going out to a large number of states, any states that will allow that, and just to expose the vehicle as much as possible. Then what comes along with that is the data taken from that on-road testing can be then put into simulation and then expanded. Waymo has good descriptions of this. Others have done it so that you can take any of the parameters, the angle of the sun, the nature of the rain, etc., and expand one situation into 100 situations. That's why Waymo likes to say, and Waymo's in the trucking business as well as Robotaxi. They like to say, I think they've done 20 million on-road miles, and they're into the, 100 billion miles in simulation, and it's a very effective combination. There are some very good reports out there from some of the automated trucking players. They're called safety reports informally. Their official name is voluntary safety self-assessments that have been submitted to NHTSA. Two Simple's done it, Kodiak, Waymo's done that, and I'm probably forgetting somebody. But you find some really good technical explanations of these concepts in those documents.
Thank you, Richard. So as we continue to test in more states and looking ahead towards operation, I think a lot can potentially change out of this. And I think one area a lot of people don't realize necessarily is how local, state, and city governments will approach autonomous vehicles and their operations. Salika, from what I understand, you're doing a lot of work on this currently at American University, which, by the way, is where Chris Roberts and I graduated undergrad from, throwing that out there. But anyway, Salika, if you could take us through some of your work at AU, thank you.
Sure, I'd be happy to. And I'm enjoying my time at your alma mater. It's an exciting opportunity to be anywhere in the automation today, but I'm particularly pleased at the work that I'm doing at American University in the policy area. So I'm in the School of Public Affairs. My research and teaching is particularly focused on policy of communities, governments, cities and towns, and states, and how they will adjust, whether they're legislative changes that need to be made, policy changes, or even their own lobbying to the federal government, all surrounding the issues of revenue and budget. So as we know, cities spend a lot of effort to keep as much revenue and money that they possibly can so that they can effectively do the business of their communities. The city's budget with an expectation very often of millions of dollars that they'll receive from vehicle infractions, from people turning right and getting caught at lights, those red light cameras, those parking fees. A city like Washington, D.C. In 2019 budgeted $324 million in parking violations. And, they are expecting that infraction by the citizen, and therefore those dollars will come into their pocket. And that's how they do their services and meet the budget of the community. But as we know and are excited for, is autonomous vehicles they'll follow the rules of the road. They're not going to make those turns when they shouldn't, and they're not going to run red lights and all the things that communities and towns and governments have benefited from in terms of violations and traffic law violations. They won't exist anymore. We've tied a lot of things, and I'm coming from the motor vehicle field, a lot of things to the driver's license, all kinds of infractions that may or may not be associated with the actuality of being behind the wheel. And yet, if we have full deployment of autonomous vehicles, those revenue pots will go away because autonomous cars do the right thing. Even when we as individual citizens may err when we're driving, we know that autonomous vehicles are going to obey the rules of the road. And so my research is dedicated to what are these communities, states, and cities doing? How are they preparing for the inevitable? If Washington, D.C. doesn't get $324 million from people running lights and parking where they shouldn't park, how do they provide services to their community? Where do they make up the deficits so that they can still provide the same needs, provide for the same needs that their community has? So that's really what my research is. And I use Washington, D.C. as an example because I'm here in the nation's capital, but I'll throw out another number. The state of Texas has $4.25 billion a year that they bring in through their motor vehicle agency and attendant costs surrounding the use of vehicles. If nothing else, COVID times have showed us how impactful these types of losses can be on a state's or city's revenue. Washington, D.C., prior to COVID-19, was writing approximately 6,000 tickets a day. Now, because of COVID-19 and people sheltering in place in their homes, they're writing about 600 tickets a day. The loss in revenue will be astronomical. As we can say, we look at New York City, who's alleged that it's $74 billion in tax loss through a 3-month period. If we start to extrapolate that over cities and towns and states and throughout the United States, we're really going to have to find other ways in which to fund our communities, and it won't be on the backs of citizens who don't follow the law when they're driving.
Wow, those are some huge numbers. Hate to admit it, but I did contribute a little bit to Washington, D.C.'s $324 million in parking violations last year. Just a little bit, though. Anyway, earlier we had Richard talk us through the history of autonomous vehicles and the technology side. Robert Brown, would you be able to talk us through the history of AV legislation? Where are we today, and how did we get here?
Well, as someone, I must admit I did not watch all 48 hours of the Surface Re-Off bill, but I did sit through probably a good 10 or 12 hours. It was good political theater. Let's divide it up. Why don't we start with the states and we'll end with the feds? So right now, according to my calculations and a little help from the National Council of State Legislatures and a few DOT contacts, I estimate around 20 states allow, if the technology from Plus AI or Too Simple or Waymo is ready today, we could deploy level 4, quote unquote, driverless trucks today on the road. There's about another handful, anywhere between 17 and 18 that allow testing, and about 11 that are still to be determined. Luckily, a lot of the Southwest and Southeast is, we'll call it green for this type of technology. Too Simple's focused on Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. I know same with along with Waymo. Embark is from California to Arizona. Kodiak is in Texas. I know Plus AI has a little different view of that. But yeah, we're all kind of focused on pushing more and more states to go green, and we've had some success. Florida, Ohio. It's a great kind of freight centric states that allow that. My friends at Kodiak and I, we kid around that you could actually have a pretty successful company just never leaving the state of Texas and automating what they call the Golden Triangle, between Dallas, San Antonio, and Houston. And that's what kind of the beauty of L4 trucks. It doesn't take much to scale this technology. A few lanes, just for a point of clarification, like if you just automated I-10, that's 30% of the freight moves along Interstate 10. That's a huge margin. Sleeka dropped the $800 billion bomb on us. Just if you think about that, estimates around half of that, could be attributed to long haul. So you're talking serious margin. So states are very important for trucks, but no more important than FMCSA and what USDOT is doing. You know, interstate commerce is key to all of our business models. So as important are the states are, and we encourage states to write friendly legislation for heavy trucks. I know myself and most of my counterparts are focused on what Elaine Chao and USDOT is doing from a regulatory perspective. I like telling this story because prior to AV 3.0, and Richard knows this well, it was Embark, Too Simple, and Otto and Uber, and then Uber closed their truck down, and it was we were kind of like the black sheep of automation, when it came to driverless technology. And then Salika and her counterparts rained upon us AV 3.0, and that changed the whole spectrum for automated trucks. And it was no coincidence after AV 3.0, you saw huge companies like Daimler make announcements for ambitions for level 4 trucks, Waymo making pivots, Aurora, titans in our industry really focusing on level 4 trucks. And since AV 3.0, we've been working hand in hand as we can as industry with FMCSA, trying to work from a regulatory perspective. We finished the advanced notice for proposed rulemaking last year. We're told the notice for proposed rulemaking for automated driving system for heavy truck is imminent. I keep being told soon, so hopefully that will be out soon, and we're excited to be a part of that as well. And because of the companies around that are doing this technology, unlike our passenger car friends, we're not asking for exemptions from NHTSA because we're not removing brake pedals and steering wheels, because human drivers will need to interact with these vehicles for their safety. We don't have to. We're not hamstrung by the lack of Congress moving on AV legislation. So we like to take credit for it as regulatory, advocates, but a lot has been done from what USDOT is and Salika. And I'll take a breath here. And my 4-year-old, I apologize, my 4-year-old's pretty upset about something downstairs, and I got to go check on him. I'll be right back.
All right.
Hey, Kevin,
no problem.
Something to that. On the side, there's two modes of operation out there when it comes to automated trucks, and we've been talking about what I call solo driverless. The other mode is truck platooning, two trucks one following the other, enabled by vehicle-to-vehicle communications for synchronized speed control and fuel economy benefits. That's been a regulatory space as well, because there's following distance laws across all the states in various forms. I think, but there's been a lot of success there. OEMs as well as the startups, such as Peloton Technology, have been working that. 27 states now fully allow commercial platooning on the road. And the next generation of platooning will be level 4 followers, driverless followers. So that's another regulatory piece that sort of overlaps with everything Robert just said. But the 3 states so far have explicitly allowed the driverless follower platooning, and it's late at night, and I'm not going to get this right, but I think it's Arizona, Nevada, and I can't remember who the other one is. But anyway, that's moving along. I think the states are supportive of making those adaptations as well.
Great. Thank you, Richard. That was actually a great segue to my next question, because it was going to be about energy efficiency. We hear a lot of news from Tesla and Nikola Motors regarding electric trucks and alternative fuel sources. So I'm wondering if electrification plays hand in hand with automation. So Robert Dingley, would you be able to speak to electrification and alternative fuel sources with AVs?
Yeah, this is an interesting question. In general, autonomy and electrification are independent technologies. One doesn't rely on the other. But having said that, from a technical point of view, EVs and other alternate powertrain technologies tend to be newer developments, and in being newer developments, they have more features for the drivers, including they'll often have adaptive cruise control and self-parking and things like that. So they're often the leaders in some of these technologies. And it's these peripheral technologies which actually help facilitate the integration of an autonomous system. So in the early days, a lot of the EVs and hybrids were the vehicles of choice for people to develop autonomous technologies. On top of that, a lot of the early computation platforms that have been used in passenger car autonomous vehicles require a lot of electrical power to run very big effectively supercomputers on wheels, or servers on wheels, which require kilowatts of electric power. So it's the electric vehicles and the hybrids which already have high power electric systems which were deemed suitable to provide a power supply for those computer systems. Of course, on a truck has a large electrical loads anyway and has a lot of capacity to produce electricity, so that's not an issue. The self-driving systems we're building at Plus AI are using conventional powertrains, but they're equally adaptable to any other type of powertrain. But I wouldn't say that one was dependent on the other. They're quite independent to me.
Thank you. So Richard, one of the main concerns around autonomous trucks is that they will eliminate jobs. How might the role of a trucker evolve in the next few years? You brought up an interesting use case before with platooning. Going forward, will truckers be completely removed from operating the truck?
It's a diverse world out there. It's natural to ask about trucking, but it's an incredibly diverse world. So it depends on the nature of the operations and the nature of the freight and so many factors. I think certainly there will be truckloads being moved without drivers where previously there were drivers. So the drivers will be, quote, taken out of the truck in some situations. The question is, what's the ripple effect? And I think it's already been mentioned that there will be a huge increase in the last mile type of movements when these trucks come off the interstate highway and they transfer their load to a human-driven vehicle to take the load the rest of the way. So there's that. There's also the issue of scaling. How fast will this happen? Our society has encountered all sorts of jobs being eliminated over the years. People talk about buggy whips. I like to talk about parking lot attendants. When was the last time a human being took your money at a parking lot? You can find it, but it's pretty rare. And there's, so many examples out there. The issue is, and I've learned this from some of the studies that have been put up there, the issue is how fast does it happen? If it's a sudden shock, then it's a big deal. If it happens over a few decades, society can absorb and adapt. And I learned this from Chris's former employer, Securing America's Future Energy. They put out a report, was it 2 years ago now, done by some very, very distinguished economists and analysts that basically looked at that and saw the truck driver, the transition of their role happening over, I think it was about 20 years. And that was seen to be not a shock to the system and something that can be handled. There are other great posts out there. I think Alden Woodrow, CEO of Ike Robotics, has also published some things. So it is something not to be ignored, but it's also not a case for hysteria either.
Got it. So one more question, and then we'll go take some questions from the audience. Very common operation models for trucks are owner-operator, in which the driver owns and operates the truck. You have the large fleets like CR England and Swift. So Salika, how do you think autonomous trucks change these traditional ownership and operation models, both for the small mom and pop shops and then the large international firms?
Thanks, Kevin. That's an interesting question. I'm not going to speak to any particular behemoth trucking company, but as I had started out saying, we have 550,000 motor carriers. If the overwhelming majority of them are mom and pops and at a tractor and a trailer is costing $250,000, that's not technology that they're going to glam onto instantly because of the expense and the opportunities really to turn their business around. But when you look at some of these really large trucking companies, you know that they've embraced cutting edge technology in the past. And there is an issue in terms of driver shortages all over the country. One of the things I probably didn't mention initially is that in 29 countries in the US, 29 states in the United States, the number one job is a truck driver. These major companies who have thousands of trucks on the road will likely be at some hybrid point where they're, as Richard said, maybe it's the last mile, and the tractor is driven, autonomously across, the interstate. But it's not a overnight. I think that frankly, if you started as a truck driver today, you could retire as a truck driver because that business will continue. I just don't think it'll be easy for a small outfit to make that kind of a sudden change. So even the big ones that can afford the expense, it'll be more of an integration than a complete switchover.
Got it. Okay. Looks like we had Robert's assistant has joined him. So, hi, little Robert.
Not introvert.
So first question from the audience comes from Viren Gujral from Philadelphia. He wants to know if the first application of autonomous trucks, will that be first mile, middle mile, or last mile?
I'll volunteer to take a stab at that. I definitely think the middle mile. The human component of what a truck driver does on the last mile is a lot. They're the security, they're the customer service, they're everything for those companies. I'm stealing this from McLane company, which most people don't know who McLane is, but they're a $50 billion Berkshire Hathaway company that delivers most of your food that you eat at restaurants and groceries. And they told us, you'll never be able to automate what our drivers do for us at the customer touch points. But, they've also had trouble recruiting those, longer middle mile jobs. And so how they see the world in the relative near future is that, you automate the middle portion and you leave their drivers at their core competencies, delivering to those stores, to Taco Bell's, to KFC's and such. So, there's lots of companies probably that would tell you the opposite, but, that's what Too Simple believes. And I probably, I don't want to put words in Plus AI's mouth as well, but, that middle mile is ripe for, disruption from an automation.
Yeah, I'll add to that. I totally agree with you, Robert. There's something, I don't even know how you put it in that structure of first mile, middle mile, last mile. There's that pre-mile, which is the logistics yards themselves, and shifting around trailers to loading docks. This has already been automated. Very recently, some companies have come to the fore. Outrider.ai is one. They're not quite at the commercial stage yet, but they're very close to it. They're doing trials with Georgia Pacific at major logistics sites, et cetera. This is an off the public road world that's sort of the classic low-hanging fruit for implementing automation. Another company doing this is in various forms is Einride, based in Sweden. So, the simpler the environment, the sooner it comes, and it's coming fastest there. And the on-road stuff will come along pretty soon as well.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. Totally agree with Robert Brown there that the middle mile is definitely the focus of Plus AI and many other autonomous trucking companies. But as Richard said, there are some operation modes where there is much less risk of harm to the general public because they're in controlled environments. So back home in Australia, for example, there are already autonomous mining trucks operating in big mines, and I know that there are companies developing trucks for those environments. And it's not just that they displace the driver there; they simply can't get enough drivers to go and work in the middle of nowhere in that quite hostile environment. So the autonomous trucking has stepped up to fill a void and to keep industry going.
I think another place where you find that automation of movement is certainly at ports across the U.S., lending that technology where the truck driver is not necessary to move the trailers around, and there is automation on lots of port yards across the U.S.
Great. That actually leads into our next question from the audience. But before we get into that, I just want to mention again, if you want to submit a question, there should be a chat function somewhere on the screen. And there you can submit the questions and we'll be able to see them. But this next question is actually a super question for an AUVSI panel. It comes from Philip Wilcox, who's writing about international AV policies. His book is due out later this year. His question is, would it be enough for the trucks to just be autonomous, or would the entire system of loading and unloading the trucks, scanning items, tracking them, should they also be automated to the greatest extent possible to maximize efficiency, gains, and around that?
That sounds like Amazon. I mean, the entire production of what happens in an Amazon factory before the item goes anywhere is once it's plucked off of these moving robots and placed in a box and sealed, it's automatically stamped with the address, and the conveyor belt takes it to the truck with the appropriate zip code so that it can be loaded and into that truck and then sent off to that next distribution center. So more companies are going to be doing that, the Walmarts of the world, and certainly very, very large shippers. But eventually, certainly much smaller operations will do the same once the logistics of the automation process is fine-tuned for those smaller companies.
Got it. So, okay, how will AVs tackle things like road construction or accidents? What might be some emergency measures that they might use in an unanticipated event?
Let me take a stab at that. The first premise behind answering a question like that is that the truck or the autonomous vehicle should always be operating within the constraints of what its capabilities are. So, for example, if the vehicle can see a certain distance down the road, it should drive in such a way that it knows it could stop, given the potential scenario of something jumping out in front of it that's just beyond its field of vision. Okay? So the point is that we're trying to make sure that we don't get into dangerous scenarios in the first place. Obviously, sticking to regulated speed limits is a small part of that, but making sure that you're driving at an appropriate speed and so forth. So the aim there is to make sure that the vehicle is always in a position to be able to put itself into a safe state. So the scenarios you've described are some of the hardest scenarios, especially for a truck. A truck is not as maneuverable as a passenger car. It can't simply just do a U-turn and turn around. And also, if it does stop on the roadway, it blocks a lot of traffic. So to handle that, this is where some infrastructure would be super valuable. Basically, the truck needs to know, well, it doesn't need to know, but it would be beneficial if the truck knew where this road construction or accident was beforehand, so that basically it didn't go down that street. Okay, and then obviously the system is able to detect the anomaly and put itself into a safe state, as I explained before, is able to stop in time and pull over. But the complexity comes from the next step is that often when there is roadworks or an accident, the vehicles are often waved by a policeman or there might be traffic cones directing the vehicle to drive around the obstruction. And driving around the obstruction may put it into oncoming traffic and may put it over double yellow lines and basically force you to momentarily break the law. And humans do this all the time, every day, and it's considered okay if someone's directing you to go around. For an autonomous vehicle, that's a slightly harder problem to solve, and there has to be some extra work done to be able to accommodate those scenarios.
I can add a little to that. One of the other concepts that's out there, the generic term for it is remote support. That we're actually going to have a panel on this at the Automated Vehicle Symposium. It's the idea that there's a human in the cloud somewhere with a communications link to the vehicle, whether it's a robotaxi or a truck, that can gain situational awareness of, for instance, the policeman waving vehicles through, and enable, sort of allow the vehicle to move in that direction, sort of give permission for the vehicle to move in particular ways. This is not the same as remote driving. I know of no one in the truck AV world that's in favor of real-time remote driving by a remote human. But the idea is that you've got a human in the loop to assist here. And maybe it's as simple as checking to see if it's safe to pull over onto the shoulder, whatever it takes. But this helps to get to deployment sooner, because the vehicle doesn't have to handle, it has to detect when it needs help and ask for help, but it doesn't have to figure it all out once there's that kind of situation. So this is an evolving space in truck automation generally. Different companies are doing it different ways, and it'll be interesting to watch how this moves forward.
Totally agree there, and the key there is that the truck has to be ultimately responsible for planning its own path and controlling to that path. So we can't rely on remote technologies to remote control the truck around an incident, but we may be able to say, okay, here is the path we want you to take, or we give you permission to drive around that obstruction, and then the truck can figure it out from there. But the truck needs to have that capability to do that, and it's quite complicated problem to solve, because every crash scenario, every construction work is different. There's not even a standard cone, traffic cone. They're all slightly different. As a human, we don't see the differences, but they're radically different to a sensor system that has to pick up the color and the shape and the radar reflections. They're all quite different. So there's no standards there, and that makes it quite difficult to detect.
Okay. This might be a broader question than just trucking, but how will insurance look for automated vehicles?
I always say the insurance companies are both excited and terrified of autonomous vehicles at the same time. Hang on. Let me answer this question real quick, okay? All right. So to give you an example, when something bad happens around an autonomous vehicle, there's complete transparency, down to the millisecond, exactly when brakes were initiated, how fast all the vehicles around you were going, behind you, forward. It is incredibly transparent. So that is a good thing, right? But it also, when autonomous vehicles get in accidents, it is a very big deal. We're not too far from Tempe, but when the fatality of Elaine Hertzberger happened, that is our the scarlet letter of our industry. And but I guess the silver lining is that you can read the NTSB report. There's complete transparency around that accident, and so you think about all the lawsuits, and Salika mentioned her old job, arbitrating, who's at fault and that kind of thing. There is hopefully a silver lining around this, that you hear these giant verdicts that are putting small and medium-sized trucking companies out of business because of it. So I always say, it's I deal a lot with our insurer, and we have a lot of deep conversations about this. It's all theoretical still on a PowerPoint, because there's not enough trucks out there. There's not enough data, but there is hopes that this will drive down insurance costs over time, as the technology is deployed across modes.
Well, one of the things that we can consider also when we're discussing insurance is not only the insurance that the manufacturer has to maintain, who's manufacturing autonomous vehicles, but in a world of widely deployed autonomous vehicles, we have many, many fewer crashes. Some studies show more than 85% of the crashes would go away. With all those crashes are attendant costs, either for life or property. So insurance carriers, those costs will be dramatically reduced, which may allow them to reduce what they would see as the risk for insuring autonomous vehicles, because that's part of the equation when they're measuring that risk. So it's still clearly early days because we don't have wide deployment, but we have thousands and thousands of crashes, tens of thousands of crashes every year on our roadways, and the attendant costs are crippling in some states with really crazy insurance rates. With autonomous vehicles, I believe that it will start to bring down those numbers, and perhaps the OEMs will see the benefit of that.
Right. So there's an expectation that passenger AV companies need to engage with public and do public education. Do trucking AV companies also have an obligation to engage with the public on AV education?
I'd say 100%, and that's been a part of Two Simple's philosophy since day one. We've been open and transparent. I think we're up to almost a dozen media ride-alongs, not including law enforcement, government partners, community leaders going out and speaking within our community. It's good old-fashioned public affairs. We operate and test on the roads that occupy our friends and family too. So we have to educate the folks. And I always like this quote from Elaine Chao that, she says the limiting factor of autonomous vehicles will be, public acceptance. And even though we're, a B2B type of business, we interact with, Americans and consumers every day when we're on the road. So we have to educate the American public on the benefits of autonomy, whether it's reduction in carbon or safety benefits, and also, hopefully, I'm stealing this from Richard Bishop. Their tomatoes are riper. So, all those type of things we have to do, as an industry, and we've been excited about it the last few years.
That's right. Ripe tomatoes, the future. But I would say that everyone across the space understands the need to do that sort of, public relations, public education, and as well as educating public safety officials, law enforcement. How do they interact with these vehicles? Waymo is very visible about doing that, but I think Too Simple has done it. Others have probably done it, and that's important going forward as well. I'm supporting Plus AI as one of my clients, and I'm part of a group within the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance, which is interacting with the state highway officials, the inspectors, to start to work these issues. And that's part of a group that includes most of the truck AV players.
I know we're coming up on time. We still have a lot of questions coming through. Thank you all for submitting questions. But since it's been brought up, Richard, can you talk about that, the ripe tomatoes example, and then we'll finish off with just one or two more.
Yeah. It's better with my visual prop, which is I usually end my talks with a big slide of ripe tomatoes. It kind of goes like this. What changes? Maybe the price of goods go down because the labor costs go down, and that's good for everybody. But what else changes? And my example is, what I see in the grocery stores in the winter in Maryland are still semi-green tomatoes because they were picked over a week ago somewhere in California, and they had to be trucked across the country, which typically takes 5 or 6 days with a single driver. So they have to be picked unripe so that they're sort of ripe, at least they're sort of red by the time they get to the grocery store, but they're not that tasty, right? We all know that. So if you get to a world of automated vehicles, the Land O'Lakes butter run that Plus AI did Took 3 days to get all the way across the country, but virtually across the country. So this means you can pick your tomatoes when they're very close to ripe, and when they're in the store, they're perfect. And that's the future, folks, ripe tomatoes. And the larger point is that the supply chain, which is a profession all of its own, and it's very complex, this is gonna ripple through that world in amazing ways. And I'm really looking forward to seeing that evolve.
Thank you, Richard. So we're all in this new COVID-19 world, and some people want to know, how will COVID-19 affect the AV trucking industry moving forward?
It has impacted, and I'm not, and I actually have a lot of friends, at these companies, and it has, just because when capital is tight, venture capital is even tighter. So, that does impact. The use case, like you mentioned, you started off with everyone, was trying to go buy toilet paper and soup, and there was nothing on the shelves. So the kind of the reason behind it has been highlighted, and even NHTSA, when published kind of use cases or future use cases of this technology, and they highlighted TuSimple and a few other companies, kind of what this technology could be. Luckily we haven't had any layoffs. We're hiring, actually. So if anyone on the, a shameless plug, if you're looking, to come join us. But yeah, I mean, venture capital is definitely tighter to come by. People are going to be a lot even more judicious with their monies, going forward. So you definitely have to have, like Robert talked about, an OEM strategy and a path to product, and really show milestones and progress. So it is. You've already seen, some consolidation in the pass car space. I would not be surprised if you see more consolidation in the truck space going forward. But we'll have to see.
Yeah, I think the way I would frame that, I agree with Robert. What's been affected by COVID is the development process, because truck AV is still in a developmental stage. But if you look beyond that to commercialization, and let's assume there's still some sort of virus, permanent, more or less permanent changes to our society from that. What I hear on the street, in my own perspective, is that trucking has is minimally affected by that compared to something like robotaxi. They've got to really work through those issues. So we'll get the developmental process back in gear and at some point and move forward.
So from Plus AI, we grounded our fleet, and we're only just ramping that up again now as the Santa Clara County allows us to, with the appropriate controls in place. So there was a lot of on-road testing we couldn't do, but that didn't stop us doing a lot of development. We have a very extensive simulation environment which allows us to continue doing software development and so forth. Where there will be some delays is that we have to interface with external companies. We previously would go and see people. We'd fly around the world or across the country to see people. Obviously, that's not going to happen for a long time. So we have to just adjust our methods to be able to perform our business remotely. There are some things that are just very difficult to do. It's very hard to remotely fix something on a truck that's on the other side of the country. So we have some delays, but overall it hasn't affected us too much. As Robert said, it has affected the broader investment landscape, but that hasn't slowed us down at Plus AI. We've got a long runway ahead of us.
All right, so this has to be the last question because it looks like little Robert wants to go out and play ball. Question we always like to end on is, what do you wish for the future? What gets you excited about the prospect for technological change in the trucking and autonomous space?
All right, sorry, and again, my apologies, guys. My wife is missing from the house, and so I'm on dad duty. But Paul's very excited to go to baseball practice, so thank you for the last question. What gets me excited is hopefully a commercial deployment. All right, well, All right, guys. Kevin, I'll talk to you guys later.
All right, I'll take over there. Thanks, Robert. For me, it's the demonstrable safety benefits. I've worked in safety critical systems before, and once you get to a deployment and a statistically significant fleet, to be able to demonstrate that you've changed the statistics around safety and around incidents and harm, to me that's super rewarding. There's nothing better than knowing that you've made a difference when it comes to safety. And then secondary to that is efficiency. Right? If we can reduce our carbon footprint, make cost of trucking cheaper because we're reducing the amount of fuel the truck might use, then that's a good thing for everybody.
I think what gets me excited is the opportunity for mobility for those who are limited in where they can go and how they can get there. Food deserts, healthcare, opportunity for jobs and advancement. Autonomy in autonomous vehicles has the opportunity to cut all of those deficits and frankly, to reorder society and sort of put everybody on the same playing field. So I'm excited for that, and I'm excited about the opportunity to spend time educating, but also reaching out in government and across OEMs so that we understand the importance of basic public education in this area.
I would, I think about the way that even though our vehicles are very sophisticated now, our society being so based on human-driven vehicles, it's a pretty primitive thing in a lot of ways. It's sort of a misuse of a human brain, if you want to think of it that way. And so we have the opportunity to move beyond that in so many ways. And I get excited about the layered nature of that, because once that's true, then your cityscape can change. These inefficiencies and inequities in society can be dealt with. Your example of food deserts, Salika. And then, another layer is the supply chain that I mentioned. So this is such an enabling sort of a turning point for society, and it just moves in all directions, and that's what's cool to me.
All right, no, this has been fantastic. Especially appreciated your last points on the future. Definitely agree. I think this is an opportunity to revolutionize transportation, an opportunity much in the same way that Ford did with the Model T. It wasn't like a luxury service to the higher ups. It was something that everyone benefited from. And I think that's something we can definitely achieve with autonomous vehicles and autonomous trucking. So that brings us to the end of our discussion. This has been awesome. Thank you so much to the panelists. Yeah, and thank you for everyone for attending. Akin Gump for allowing us to use your webinar software, and AUVSI for helping to make this happen. Yeah, this has been amazing. If you're not already a member of DCAVA or AUVSI, please join. You can find DCAVA on Twitter at DC Autonomous and LinkedIn as well. And AUVSI also has a Twitter and LinkedIn accounts which you can reach out to. So again, thank you all for coming. Can't wait to see you all again in person, and can't wait to see you all at AVS next month.
Nice job moderating, Kevin.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin.
Good night, all.
All right. Good night.